Don't make a scene, Ilara.
You already did.
Ilara, please, we can talk.
You had years to know me.
I didn't know who you were.
That was never the problem.
She sat at the birthday dinner table in a cream dress and pearl earrings, quiet still. The woman nobody looked at twice. Her husband stood behind her, wine warm in his blood, his girlfriend's phone already recording from across the table. And then, in front of his entire family, he grabbed the back of his wife's head and shoved her face into a 3-tier birthday cake. The girlfriend laughed. The room went silent, and Marcus Holt stood there grinning the way men grin, when they are absolutely certain the woman they just humiliated has nothing, no power, no voice, no way to fight back. He was catastrophically wrong. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video. And subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. But to understand what Ilara Voss Whitfield did next, you have to understand who she had always been, and why she had spent 3 years making sure no one ever thought to ask. The evening of her mother's funeral, Ilara was 19 years old. The sky had turned copper over the Virginia tree line, and the air carried the particular stillness of October, the kind that feels like the world pausing to acknowledge something that cannot be undone. Her father, Edward Whitfield, stood on the porch of the Richmond estate with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the horizon the way a man looks at something he trusts with a great secret. He did not offer comfort in the way people usually offer comfort, with softness and reassurance, and the gentle, untrue words designed to make grief feel smaller than it is. He looked at the tree line for a long moment, and then he looked at his daughter and he said, without preamble, "Ilara, the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thinks matters. Remember that." She had remembered. She had built her entire adult life inside the architecture of that sentence. Edward Whitfield had built Whitfield Global Holdings from a single warehouse in Columbus, Ohio over 4 decades. By the time Ilara turned 25, the company had grown into something that required a Forbes profile to describe, and a congressional hearing to contextualize. 47 acquisitions, interests across infrastructure, logistics and finance, and a reputation for being the most strategically invisible major conglomerate in American corporate history. Edward was precise about that invisibility. He believed that power studied from above was power half understood, but power learned from below was power that could not be taken from you. So he sent his daughter to learn from below. She swept warehouse floors in Memphis in steel-toed boots. She answered phones in a Chicago acquisitions office under a name that appeared nowhere on the Whitfield family tree. She audited supply chains in Phoenix hotels with the kind of focused attention that made grown men twice her age take notes, and then go back to their desks wondering why they'd felt the need to. She did all of it quietly, methodically, without complaint, because her father had raised her to understand that inheritance was not a destination. It was a preparation. By the time she arrived at the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala in Nashville, on a spring evening 4 years ago, she was 29 years old, and she had learned enough about the inside of the empire she would one day own to know exactly what kind of man would be dangerous inside it, and exactly what kind of man would not. She was working as a volunteer server that night, black apron, hair pinned, tray level. She moved through tables of donors and executives and the kind of people who write checks in amounts that end in multiple zeros and expect gratitude in return. And she watched all of them the way her father had taught her, quietly, completely, without letting her attention show. She noticed Marcus Holt from across the room before he noticed her at all. He was standing at the far end with Victor Shaw, Whitfield Global's regional VP of Business Development, a man whose expense reports Ilara had reviewed from a distance, and whose judgment she had quietly assessed as competent but ambitious in the way that bears watching. Marcus stood slightly apart from Victor's cluster of conversation, holding a glass of scotch he barely touched, scanning the room with the practiced ease of a man who understood that events like this were not parties but opportunities. His eyes moved across the room like a chess player's eyes move across a board, cataloging pieces, assessing positions. The servers were furniture to him, necessary furniture, perhaps, but furniture nonetheless. Ilara reached across a guest to collect an empty glass. The tray tilted 2 degrees. Sparkling water caught the candlelight on its way onto the cuff of his charcoal jacket. He turned. He expected the kind of apology that came in multiples, stammered, diminished, excessive. What he got was Alara, perfectly still, offering him a dry napkin and saying, that suit was already too tight across the shoulders. The water probably helped. He blinked. The scotch paused halfway to his lips. Then the laugh came, real, undone, surprised entirely out of him. They stood in the corner of that room for 40 minutes. She told him she worked in financial consulting. He told her he was Senior VP of Acquisitions at Whitfield Global Holdings and watched for the impression the title made. She tilted her head slightly at the company name. A pause. So small it could only be caught by someone looking for it, and said, I've heard of them. She had founded them. What Marcus Holt did not know that evening, and what he would not know for another 4 years, was that the woman he had just spent 40 minutes impressing was the only person in the world whose signature could end his career with a single line. He walked away from that corner of the room feeling like something important had just begun. He was not wrong about that. He was simply wrong about which direction it would go. The courtship lasted 14 months, and it was the most thorough observation Alara had ever conducted. She watched Marcus the way she watched everything that mattered, from the inside, without showing that she was watching at all. She learned how he moved through a room when he thought no one important was paying attention. She learned what he ordered when he was comfortable, and what he ordered when he wanted to impress. She learned that his laugh could be genuine, and that he was capable of listening when something surprised him enough to require it. She also learned that he told the story of his career the way men tell stories about themselves when the story has become load-bearing, something they need to believe more than they need to examine. He had been at Whitfield Global for 6 years when they met. He spoke about the company with the proprietary ease of a man who had earned his place inside it. She listened and said very little, and he interpreted her silence as admiration, which told her something important. She had not decided to marry him by the end of those 40 minutes in Nashville. She had decided to find out if the man worth watching was also the man worth choosing. She gave him a chance. She gave him 14 months of honest chances, the kind you give someone when you genuinely hope to be wrong about the things you've noticed. She found things worth keeping: his humor, his attention when it was real, his capacity for warmth when he wasn't performing. She found things that concerned her more the longer she looked. The way he adjusted his behavior when important people entered a room, the way he measured his own value by titles and access. The way certain conversations seemed to bore him before they finished, but she had married him anyway. That was the truth she returned to in the years after with the particular honesty that tends to arrive in the dark when nobody else is listening. She had married him anyway because she had hoped the gap between who he was and who he was capable of being would close. Because love, at its most optimistic, is the decision to believe in a future version of someone. And because she was a woman who had spent 3 years becoming invisible, and Marcus Holt was the first person in a long time who had made her feel like she might be worth looking at. She knew going in what he did not know. She chose to let the inequality stand, because revealing it would have changed everything, and she had not yet decided what she wanted everything to be. They married in Asheville on a Saturday in September with 30 guests and a view of the Blue Ridge that no one adequately described in the photographs. The ceremony was simple by design. Alara wore a dress her mother would have approved of, and she carried white ranunculus, because white ranunculus had been her mother's favorite, and she was not above bringing the people she had lost into the rooms where important things happened. Edward Whitfield stood at the back of the outdoor ceremony in a dark suit, hands clasped, attending as a quiet older gentleman his daughter had introduced as my father Frank. He was 64 years old and carried the stillness of a man who has learned that stillness is its own form of power, that the most potent version of presence is the kind no one notices until after you've left the room. Marcus shook his hand at the reception with the warmth of a man who had already moved on from the handshake before it ended. A brief, professional clasp, the kind extended to pleasant peripheral people at important events. He said something about being glad Frank could make it. He moved toward the bar. Edward watched him go, He did not smile, he did not frown. He recorded Marcus Holt in his memory, the way a vault records a combination, completely and permanently, and with the understanding that the information would matter later, even if the timing of when to use it had not yet arrived. The house in Charlotte was Ilara's in the ways that matter. She had found it. She had chosen the neighborhood for its light in the mornings, and its proximity to the trees she liked to walk through when she needed to think. She had furnished it room by room, memorizing each space's character at different hours, the way her father had taught her to learn everything she intended to understand. She had negotiated the purchase through an entity whose name bore no resemblance to anything connected to Wint. Marcus came home to a house he believed was theirs. He ate the meals she prepared without asking what was in them. He attended her choices of furniture and art and small domestic detail with the comfortable incuriousness of a man who had decided that managing the large things exempted him from the small ones. She cooked. She kept the household moving. She attended his company events as the quiet, pretty wife who smiled and deflected questions about herself with the practiced ease of a woman who has spent years ensuring that nobody thinks to look too closely. She was warm at his side. She was gracious at his table. She was exactly what the wife of an ambitious corporate man was supposed to be, and she executed that role so thoroughly that Marcus never once stopped to wonder why a woman as intelligent as Ilara seemed so thoroughly, peacefully unambitious. He missed a great deal by not wondering. His career inside Whitfield Global advanced with a smoothness that he attributed to his own quality of work. The proposals he submitted moved through the approval pipeline faster than those of his colleagues. His annual reviews were favorable. His bonuses grew. He was good at his job, genuinely, measurably good, and he let that truth flatten out into something larger than it was. He began to wear his position the way certain men wear expensive watches. Not as something earned exactly, but as something that announced the version of themselves they had decided to perform. By the end of the second year, his confidence had grown by increments that outpaced everything else. Ilara watched it happen. She watched it the way she watched most things, from the inside, without showing that she was watching at all. She had told herself she was being patient. She had told herself she was giving him time. At some point in the third year, sitting across from him at a dinner she had cooked, and a table she had chosen in a house she owned, she began to understand with a grief she kept very still inside her chest that the version of Marcus she had been waiting for was not coming, and that she had known this for longer than she had been willing to say. The marriage had given her something she had not expected, a very clear picture of exactly who they both were. It was a more honest education than she had bargained for, and when the first piece of evidence of something worse than distance arrived, a faint trace on a jacket collar, something bright and synthetic that had no business being on a man, who claimed to have worked late reviewing acquisition reports, she was not surprised and was only, finally, ready to stop pretending she was waiting for something else. The perfume was a Tuesday. It came home on Marcus's collar on the kind of Tuesday that had given no particular indication of being significant. Overcast, ordinary, a day that ended the way most days ended, with Marcus coming through the door late, jacket draped over one arm, phone still in his hand. Ilara was in the kitchen, finishing the dinner she had kept warm for him. She took the jacket to hang it. She folded it over the laundry basket in the hallway, and she stood there for a moment with the fabric in her hands, because the scent that reached her was not his. It was something bright and synthetic, the kind that announces itself as in a room and belongs entirely to someone else. She said nothing. She returned to the kitchen. She set a plate in front of him and sat down with her own and ate quietly. Nobody watching them from outside the window would have known. 3 weeks later, a hotel key card fell out of the pocket of his blazer during the wash cycle. A plain white card with a magnetic strip, no branding, no room number. She picked it up from the drum of the machine and held it for a moment, then set it on the nightstand on his side of the bed without comment. He moved it the next morning, without meeting her eyes. She was making coffee when he did it. She did not look up from the counter. This was how she had learned most of what she knew, not through confrontation, but through close attention to the things people reveal when they believe no one is paying the right kind of attention. The annual Whitfield Global Leadership Dinner was held in November at a hotel in downtown Charlotte with the kind of ballroom that suggested importance through its dimensions. Marcus had been attending for 4 years. Alara attended as his wife, a role she performed with the precise, practiced ease she had developed for exactly these occasions. She wore black. She kept her drink in her hand and her opinions in reserve, and circulated through the room with the fluency of someone who had spent years learning how powerful people behaved when they thought no one was studying them. CFO Arthur Pierce was there. He was a lean, silver-haired man in his early 60s, whose mind worked like an actuarial table, calm, exact, always accounting for risk. He had been with the company for 11 years, he reported ultimately to a board whose majority shareholder had been, until February, Edward Whitfield, and was now his daughter. Arthur Pierce had known who Alara was for 4 months before that dinner. He had been corresponding with her through Daniel Cho, her proxy and private legal representative, a quiet, meticulous man who operated from a law office on the 15th floor of a building in Richmond, and who managed the architecture of Alara's private interests with the particular care of someone, who understands that the most valuable things are always the ones least visible. The correspondence had covered board-level restructuring, executive performance reviews, and the quiet preparation for a transition that no one else in the company knew was coming. Marcus was mid-handshake with Arthur when Arthur's eyes moved past Marcus's shoulder and found Alara across the room. Something happened in Arthur's face, a quick, complicated thing that lasted less than 2 seconds. Before he recovered, smiled and said to Marcus, "Lovely evening. You must introduce me to your wife." He crossed the room to them. He shook Alara's hand. He said, "Lovely to meet you." He excused himself to find a drink. Marcus noticed nothing. He had refilled his wine glass twice and was telling a story to a colleague about a proposal that had moved through approval in record time. He was happy about the speed of that approval. He had never asked why. 20 minutes later, across the room, Arthur Pierce looked at Alara and gave her a single nod. Small, precise. The nod of a man confirming a standing instruction from the only person in the building, whose instruction he was legally obligated to follow above all others. Marcus, from where he stood, saw only a polite acknowledgement between strangers. Alara called Daniel Cho every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, when Marcus was reliably absent. Her phone had a dedicated contact for Daniel's number, with a flat single-tone ringtone. Nothing musical, nothing that invited attention. Marcus had heard it twice. He asked once who it was. She said, "A colleague from consulting, old friend." He nodded and went back to his screen. One Saturday morning he walked into the kitchen and she was at the table with a thick document in front of her dense columns of financial projections and organizational charts. She closed it when he came in. He glanced at the cover page. Restructuring Memorandum, Whitfield Global Holdings, Q3 Review. "What's that?" he asked. "Something for a friend's portfolio," she said. She slid it into her bag and stood to refill her coffee. He poured his own and forgot the whole thing before the cup was full. That document had Alara's own handwriting in the margins. It had been printed from her private server. She had been reviewing the restructuring of her own company at her kitchen table while her husband stood 3 feet away and had looked directly at it and seen nothing at all. Her father's voice lived permanently in the back of her mind. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thinks matters. She was beginning to understand slowly, and with a grief she kept very still inside her chest, that this included the room of her own marriage. Marcus did not see her. Not because she was invisible, as she was exactly who she had always been, but because he had decided early and permanently what she was, and once a person has decided what you are, they tend to stop looking for evidence that might complicate the answer. She had given him every opportunity to look. He had consistently declined. She did not confront him about the perfume. She did not confront him about the key card. She watched and she waited, and she called Daniel Cho on Tuesdays, and she reviewed the restructuring memorandum with notes in the margins, and she understood with increasing clarity that she was in the process of gathering something that would eventually need to be used. The question was not whether the frame was coming together, it was whether she had yet seen everything inside it. She had not. Not quite. The picture was not complete, and she would not close it until it was. Serena Drake arrived at the Whitfield Global Charlotte Acquisitions office on a Monday in November, 11 months before the birthday dinner, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a blazer the color of storm clouds. She was 31 years old. Her resume listed a master's degree in corporate finance from Georgetown, 3 years at a boutique mergers and acquisitions firm in Atlanta, and a recommendation letter from a senior partner that used the phrase instinctive deal architecture in a way that made the hiring committee feel they were acquiring something rare. She had sharp eyes and the particular kind of laugh that adjusts its volume to precisely what the room requires. Louder for men who need to feel funny, quieter for men who need to feel admired. She had studied people the way other people studied markets. She had learned, young and efficiently, that in a room full of ambitious men, the fastest route to access was not competition but proximity. Find the person who already has the momentum. Position yourself inside his orbit. Let his draft carry you further and faster than your own effort could manage. She identified Marcus Holt within 6 weeks of her hire date. He was, she assessed, exactly the kind of man she knew how to navigate. Accomplished enough to feel consequential, insecure enough to need confirmation, and just dissatisfied enough in his domestic life to mistake the focused attention of a sharp woman for evidence that he deserved something better than what he had. He spoke about his wife the way certain men speak about their marriages, with the particular flatness of someone describing a background detail in a story about something else. His wife was quiet. His wife was fine. He used the word fine with the frequency of a man who had stopped asking whether the word was accurate. Serena sat near him at department briefings. She stayed late when he stayed late. She asked questions that let him explain things he already knew, which men like Marcus experienced as stimulating conversation. She laughed at things that were not quite funny. She listened with the specific quality of attention that tells a person what they most want to believe, that they are more interesting than the world has so far recognized. By the 4th month, the hotel receipts had started. By the 6th, his personal cell number was saved in her phone under the name of a vendor. What neither Marcus nor Serena understood, what they had no way of knowing, was that Daniel Cho had flagged Serena Drake to Alara 3 months into her tenure, not because of Marcus, because of the acquisition proposals. A routine analysis of Serena's submitted targets revealed something that made Daniel set down his coffee and read the documents twice before picking up the phone. 3 separate acquisition proposals, each presented as original research, each co-signed by Marcus Holt, as his department's senior recommendation, contained target companies that overlapped almost perfectly with intelligence that could only have originated inside Atlas Capital Partners, Whitfield Global's most aggressive and strategically hostile competitor. The overlap was not coincidence. The specificity was not luck. Atlas Capital had placed Serena Drake inside Whitfield Global's Charlotte Acquisitions office with a specific mandate: cultivate access to a senior executive who could co-sign intelligence transfers framed as legitimate proposals and route the target lists back to Atlas's internal research division, where they would be used to outmaneuver Whitfield in acquisition races across 3 markets. Marcus had been co-signing her work for months. He had been doing it with the comfortable efficiency of a man who trusted his own judgment, because he had never had reason not to, because his judgment had always been ratified quickly, promotions arriving on schedule, proposals moving through approval faster than those of his colleagues. He had not examined Serena's work closely enough to see what it actually was, because examining it closely would have required him to slow down, and slowing down would have required him to question the smoothness of his own momentum, and questioning the smoothness of his own momentum was not something Marcus Holt had practiced. Alara heard Daniel's summary over the phone on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock. She sat with the information for a long moment after he finished. She could hear Daniel waiting, patient, precise pen likely in hand. Then she said, "Let her stay. I want to see the full picture before I close the frame." A pause, and Daniel, keep a copy of everything. Every proposal, every timestamp, every email thread. I want the architecture complete before a single piece of it moves. He said, "Understood." She hung up. She walked back to the living room where Marcus was watching television and sat across from him, and asked how his day was. He said, "Long. The usual. She said, "I made pasta." He said, "Great," and did not look up from the screen. She set a plate in front of him and sat down with her own, and they ate quietly. And the only sound in the room was the television and the occasional clink of silverware against ceramic. Nobody watching them from outside the window would have known that she was sitting across the table from a man who was helping his girlfriend feed her employer's intelligence to a competitor. They would not have known she had known about it for 3 months. They would not have known that she had not yet moved on it, because she was Alara Voss Whitfield, and Alara Voss Whitfield did not close a frame until every detail inside it was fully visible. The pasta was good. She had added fresh basil from the plant on the windowsill. He ate it without comment. Later that night, Serena Drake posted to her social media account a photograph of the Charlotte skyline at golden hour. The caption read, "When you work for the machine, but you're really running it," followed by a winking emoji. It received 63 likes. She had absolutely no idea. Catherine Holt turned 65 on a Thursday in October. She was a woman who had raised 2 sons with the particular mixture of warmth and worry that defines mothers who know their children more accurately than their children know themselves. She had loved Marcus with the fierce, anxious love of a parent who sees the gap between who a child is and who they are capable of being, and spends 20 years hoping the gap will close on its own. She had loved Liam with the quieter pride of a mother whose child has simply solidly become a good man. And she had loved Alara, had loved her from the very first time Marcus brought her home 3 weeks after Asheville, with something that felt almost like an apology. Because Catherine Holt knew. She had hired the private investigator 2 years into the marriage, not from suspicion of Alara. Never that. From the protective instinct of a mother who understood that her son was the kind of man women sometimes married for complicated reasons, and she needed to know who Alara Voss really was before she allowed herself to trust what she was seeing. The investigator had returned a file 14 days later. Catherine had been standing at her kitchen counter in Mooresville when she opened it, and she had read the first page. And then she had sat down on the kitchen floor simply directly, without drama, and held the pages in both hands for a very long time. Alara Voss was Alara Voss Whitfield, only daughter of Edward Whitfield, the man who had built the company that paid for the office where her son went every morning believing himself to be consequential. The man Marcus spoke about with casual, proprietary confidence. The invisible founder behind the company he described as his arena was his wife's father, and Marcus had shaken the man's hand at his own wedding and forgotten him before the handshake ended. Catherine had told no one, not Marcus, not Liam. She had reasoned with herself across 2 years of quiet mornings that it was not her secret to reveal that Derek, Marcus, had married Alara for Alara, or at least she had needed to believe that, because the alternative was a version of her son she was not prepared to know, that if Alara wanted Marcus to understand who she was, Alara would decide that in her own time. She had protected him. The understanding of what that protection had cost settled into her chest like cold water when she saw Serena Drake arrive on Marcus's arm at Carrington's private dining room. The restaurant was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, the kind of room with a view of the city that made occasions feel significant. 14 people around the table, white tablecloths, candles. Catherine at the head, wearing the dark blue dress she had bought for the occasion because dark blue was what she wore when she wanted to feel equal to something. Alara arrived with a bouquet of orange tulips wrapped in brown paper. Orange because 14 months ago, at a Sunday lunch that Catherine had half forgotten, she had mentioned in passing that tulips was her favorite flower and that she preferred orange to yellow because yellow always looked worried to her. It was an offhand comment, the kind people make without expecting to be heard. Alara had heard it. She had filed it with the same precision she filed everything, and she had bought exactly the right flowers for exactly the right person on exactly the right occasion. She came through the door in a cream-wrap dress, and her mother's pearl earrings carrying the tulips in one arm. Catherine stood up from her chair and crossed the room before anyone else had moved, and hugged her first, longer than the occasion required, longer than a birthday hug required, longer than anything except the weight of 2 years of something she had not been able to put down. "You look beautiful tonight, honey," Catherine said quietly into Alara's shoulder. Her voice was steady. The rest of her was not. Alara pulled back and looked at her, really looked, the way she looked at things, or when she was reading what wasn't being said. "Thank you, Vivian, so do you," she said just as quietly. Something passed between them that required no translation. A language made entirely of understanding between two women who knew the same truth, and had been keeping it in different rooms. Marcus watched it from across the room and felt nothing in particular. The private dining room filled. Liam arrived with his wife, Sophia, who moved through the space with the careful alertness of a woman, who had been married to a Holt long enough to recognize when one of them was doing something irreversible. She read the room in the first 2 minutes and positioned herself 3 seats from the situation and kept her wine glass within reach. Serena Drake arrived on Marcus's arm and was introduced as a colleague and close friend. She wore a blazer the color of the storm clouds she had worn on her first day at the office, which Alara noted without expression. She placed her phone face up on the table before the appetizers arrived, camera app already visible, and told Marcus, before anyone else was seated, that she wanted to make a little birthday video for his mom. Marcus had thought it was thoughtful. He had genuinely, completely thought it was thoughtful. He had looked at Serena across the table with the expression of a man who keeps finding new reasons to confirm the story he has already decided to believe about himself. The dinner moved through its first course with the precise gathering tension of weather before a storm. The kind of stillness that feels like calm until the moment it reveals itself as pressure. Conversation moved in the careful that families construct when a room contains someone who does not belong there, and everyone knows it except the person who brought them. Liam spoke mostly to Catherine and kept his eyes away from Serena's end of the table. Sophia ate carefully and watched everything and said very little, which was the most articulate thing anyone did all evening. Serena had positioned herself 3 chairs from Alara and spent the first course performing the role of charming outsider with the kind of studied ease that required a great deal of invisible effort. She asked Catherine about her garden. She laughed at Liam's story about a camping trip. She touched Marcus's forearm twice, each time a gesture she framed as punctuation, but which was actually possession, and both times she did it, she watched Alara without appearing to watch Alara. Alara did not react. She ate, she passed the bread. She asked Catherine's sister about her grandchildren by name because she had remembered those names too. She refilled Catherine's water glass without being asked. She was so thoroughly, serenely present at that table that her composure had begun to feel, to anyone paying the right kind of attention, less like peace and more like the flat surface of water above something very deep, very still, and very much in motion. Under the table, between the entree plates and the arrival of the cake, Serena's hand found Marcus's knee. He left it there. Sophia Holt set her fork down and looked at her plate for the remainder of the course. The French bakery's cake arrived on a rolling cart at the end of the entree course, 3 tiers, white fondant, buttercream roses in ivory and pale gold. The words "Happy Birthday," Mom written in gold script across the bottom tier. The servers positioned it at the head of the table, and the room filled with singing. Everyone rising, everyone leaning in, Catherine pressing both hands together with the genuine emotion of a woman who had survived enough to understand the value of an ordinary evening with people she loved. Photographs. Everyone crowded around Catherine. Marcus stood next to Alara. He had been drinking since before the entree. 4 glasses of Malbec across the course of the evening, and there was a warmth in him that he had long confused with happiness, when it was actually just the temporary absence of anything difficult. Serena's phone was raised across the table, recording. What happened next lasted 3 seconds. Marcus's hand went to the back of Alara's head, not gently, not playfully, not with the carelessness of a man who misjudged a moment. The way a man moves when he has an audience he is performing for and a target who he has decided cannot respond. He shoved her face directly into the second tier of the birthday cake, hard white fondant, buttercream roses. The gold lettering absorbed her left cheekbone. The impact made a sound that was absorbed immediately by the silence that followed it. The room went still, complete structural silence. The kind that doesn't feel like quiet, but like the moment after something irreversible happens. The split second before the understanding of what has occurred catches up to the room. Serena let out a short burst of laughter from behind her phone. High, startled, delighted, the way a person laughs when they believe a performance is going according to plan. Liam said Marcus, and stopped. The word was a hand placed on something that could not be stopped. Sophia pushed back her chair. Catherine's face collapsed from the inside, the way faces do when grief finally runs out of places to be contained. And Alara straightened up slowly, with the deliberate composure of a person who has, in this exact moment, received the vifalvisha bring every calculation she has been running for months. Buttercream sat on her left cheekbone. Her pearl earring had stayed on. She picked up the cloth napkin from beside her plate and wiped her face methodically, without urgency, without performance, the way a surgeon closes after a procedure. Clean, focused, complete. She looked at Marcus. His grin was still there, tilted, wine-warm. His eyes moving toward Serena's phone to find his reflection in someone else's approval. "Relax," he said. "It's a joke, Maya, Elara. Come on." The grin stopped, because Elara's expression was not anger, it was not humiliation. It was not the face of a woman absorbing damage. It was the face of a woman who had just heard a starting gun. She reached into her purse, she pressed one contact. The flat single tone rang once and answered in under 4 seconds. Daniel. Her voice was the volume of a woman confirming a coffee order. There was nothing in it that the room could name as fury, and that absence of fury was the most frightening thing anyone at that table had ever heard. "It's time." She ended the call, set the phone face down on the table beside the ruined napkin, and then she turned her full attention to Marcus, unhurried, complete. The way a person turns to face something they have been waiting to face for a very long time. "Keep recording," she said pleasantly to Serena without looking at her. "You're going to want that footage." Serena lowered the phone 3 inches, then raised it back, confused. Alara looked at Marcus and began to speak the way a person delivers a presentation they have prepared with great care, not with nervousness, but with the thoroughness of someone who needed every word to land in exactly the right place. "You have been an employee of Whitfield Global Holdings for 9 years. You are currently Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, Charlotte Division. Your base salary is $460,000 annually. Your most recent performance review was submitted 6 weeks ago by CFO Arthur Pierce, who rated your departmental performance as above average with noted concerns regarding judgment in personnel allocation." She held his gaze. "I know what is in your performance review because Arthur Pierce reports to me. Every review he files routes through my office before it is finalized." The silence in the room changed density. "My name," she said, "is Alara Voss Whitfield. Edward Whitfield is my father. I am the majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board of Whitfield Global Holdings. I have held that position since February, when my father suffered his cardiac event." She paused, just long enough. "You sent a get-well card to the hospital, Marcus. To my father, you signed it. Best wishes, Marcus Holt, SVP Acquisitions." Another pause. "He showed it to me. I thought you should know that." Liam said something that was not a word. Serena Drake's phone dropped 6 inches. Her mouth opened. Marcus's face did not crumble dramatically. It drained, slowly, structurally, the way color leaves a room when the light source is removed. Not a collapse, a disappearance. His hands, flat on the table in front of him, looked suddenly like they belonged to a much older man. His mouth opened. "You," he started. "3 attorneys are currently in this building," Alara said. 2 represent Whitfield Global's legal department and are here to deliver your formal termination documentation and initiate the recovery of company property. The 3rd represents me personally." She turned to Serena. Her voice did not change. "Ms. Drake, the Atlas Capital acquisition proposals you submitted in August, co-signed by Marcus. I have the source materials, I have the email threads. I have 27 pages of documented evidence of what you have been doing inside my company and who asked you to do it." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "My attorney, Margaret Cole, will be in touch. I would strongly suggest retaining counsel before Monday." Serena's phone was at her side now. Her face had gone the color of the white fondant still on Alara's cheekbone. Alara stood. She looked at Catherine. Warm, real, steady. "Happy birthday, Vivian. I'm sorry this happened at your dinner. The tulips are for the house. I hope you'll keep them." Catherine pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were full. Alara picked up her jacket. She looked at Marcus one final time with the expression of a woman who has finished something that required great patience and has decided not to spend any more time on it. "The divorce petition was filed this morning," she said, and she walked out. The 3 attorneys arrived within the time it took Catherine's sister to gather her coat and quietly remove herself from a room that had stopped being a birthday party the moment Alara reached into her purse. Marcus sat in the private dining room for 11 minutes after the door closed behind Alara. No one moved. The birthday cake sat at the center of the table with its second tier caved inward and its gold lettering partially obscured, and nobody looked at it directly because looking at it directly required acknowledging everything it had just become a symbol of. The 2 attorneys from Whitfield Global's legal department were precise and unhurried. They placed the termination documentation in front of Marcus with the efficiency of people who had prepared for this moment well in advance. Cause: conduct unbecoming of a senior executive, pending investigation into co-authorization of documents under Section 7B of the Employment Agreement. Effective immediately. Benefits terminated. Access revoked. The 3rd attorney, a woman in a charcoal blazer whose face communicated nothing, placed a sealed envelope beside the termination papers and told Marcus, without inflection, that Mrs. Whitfield's personal counsel recommended he retain representation before the first hearing date, which was printed on the first page inside. Marcus sat with his hands flat on the table and did not open the envelope. Liam broke the silence the only way it could be broken honestly. He said his brother's name. Just that, Marcus. Not an accusation, not a question. Just the sound of a person who loves you and is no longer able to pretend the situation is something other than what it is. Serena Drake stood up before the attorneys had finished, laying out the documentation. She said, "I should go." She looked at Marcus once. His eyes were fixed on the sealed envelope. He said nothing. She picked up her phone and her portfolio bag and walked out of the dining room, through the restaurant, and down into the parking garage beneath Carrington's. It was only when she was inside her car with the door closed that she unlocked her phone and found 3 voicemails from a number she recognized as Atlas Capital Partners' Internal Security Division. The first said, "Cassandra, Serena, we need to talk about your clearance level." The second said, "Call us back immediately." The third said nothing. It clicked off after 2 seconds of open air. She sat in the parking garage under the sodium lights and understood very precisely what those 3 voicemails meant. She had worked for Atlas Capital's intelligence operation for 11 months. She had taken their placement inside Whitfield Global. She had fed their analysts the target lists they had asked for, and now, within hours of Alara Voss Whitfield standing up in a restaurant and saying 27 pages of documented evidence, aloud in a room with witnesses, Atlas was erasing her. She was not a colleague to them. She was not an asset. She was a wire that had been discovered, and they were cutting it clean. She sat in the car for 23 minutes. She made no calls. Back at the table, Marcus finally opened the envelope. Inside, clipped to the divorce petition's cover page, was a 1-page inventory of company assets to be recovered. The car, the corporate card, the office access badge. Below that, 3 lines describing the house in Charlotte, titled under Whitfield Residential Properties, LLC since the date of purchase, 4 years ago. He had lived in Alara's house for 4 years and had never known it wasn't his. He read the address 3 times. His address. The address he had given people for 4 years, printed under a company name that bore the name of the woman he had just shoved into a birthday cake in front of her mother-in-law. Catherine picked up the orange tulips from the side table near the door, still wrapped in their brown paper, exactly as Alara had left them. She held them against her chest like something she intended to keep. Not as a gesture, not for anyone watching. Just a woman holding the proof that someone had known the right thing to bring to a very difficult room and had brought it anyway. By 6 the next morning, the situation existed in 3 separate forms on 3 separate platforms. Sophia Holt had posted a 12-second video to her private Instagram before fully thinking through what private meant in the context of a story like this one. The caption read, "I don't want to say what I just witnessed, but..." She had tagged no one. She believed the audience was 17 people. By 6 a.m., the post had been screenshotted and reposted 340 times. Comment sections on entertainment pages began asking the same question. Who is that woman? And why does she look like she knew exactly what was coming? Serena Drake's original recording sat on her phone's camera roll untouched, under a legal preservation notice that arrived from Margaret Cole's office at 9:47 p.m. 14 lines of precise language explaining what publishing, sharing, or altering the footage would mean in the context of an active civil proceeding. She read it twice. She locked her phone. She did not sleep. Carrington's own security system had captured a secondary angle, a fixed position camera in the upper corner of the presenting room, grainy but sufficient. Ilara's legal team had filed a formal preservation order for that footage before 10 p.m. The restaurant responded within the hour. Ilara stood at the window of the house in Charlotte that had always been hers and looked at the city for a while in the dark. She did not cry. She had already done that in private months ago, in the kind of grief that does not perform itself for an audience. She had cried for the marriage she had hoped for. She was done crying for the one she had actually had. She called Daniel Cho at 11:15 p.m. "It's moving," he said. "I know," she said. "Margaret says the board briefing is confirmed for Monday at 9. Tell her to make it 8, Ilara said. "I want the room settled before business hours." She hung up. She stood at the window a while longer. Then she went to bed. She had done what needed to be done. The rest of it would move on its own because she had built it to. Monday morning. 8:03 a.m. Serena Drake badged into the Whitfield Global Holdings building in Charlotte. The door did not respond. She tried again. A security officer appeared at her shoulder within 45 seconds. Professionally courteous. No expression of judgment. Simply a man performing an assigned task, and said, "Ms. Drake, we've been asked to escort you to HR." The HR director, Lynn Hartley, had been with Whitfield Global for 14 years. She delivered the termination with the brisk compassion of someone who understood that efficiency was its own form of mercy. Cause material breach of contract, specifically non-disclosure provisions, Section 14C, effective immediately, benefits terminated, access revoked. A box of Serena Drake's desk belongings had already been packed and sat beside the office door. At 10 a.m., Atlas Capital Partners released a statement through their communications office to 3 financial publications simultaneously. They had no current or historical employment relationship with Serena Drake, and any suggestion otherwise was without factual basis. The statement had been drafted over the weekend. By the time Serena's phone loaded the first article, her name had been removed from every internal Atlas directory, every project file she had contributed to, and the email server she had used to send the acquisition intelligence lists. They had not simply fired her. They had made her disappear from their records the way you remove a line from a document, not with ceremony, but with a keystroke. Margaret Cole filed the civil case Tuesday morning. 27 pages. Every acquisition proposal, every timestamp on every email thread. Source mapping that traced Serena Drake's target lists directly to Atlas Capital's internal research division. It was the most organized act of professional documentation Serena had ever seen, and it had her name on every page. She called Derek, called Marcus, on Wednesday. He did not answer. She called Thursday. He picked up on the 4th ring and said without preamble, "I can't help you. I don't have anything left to give." He hung up before she could respond. She sat in her apartment in the South End, or the one she had been paying for, with a Whitfield Global salary that had now been terminated, and understood, in the precise and airless way that real understanding arrives, that she had been used, not by Marcus, by Atlas Capital Partners. They had placed her inside Whitfield Global, like a piece on a board, and when the board was overturned, they had swept her off it along with everything else, without a second consideration. She had thought she was running something, or she had been a tool. The TikTok post was still live, Charlotte skyline. When you work for the machine, but you're really running it. She stared at it for a long time. She did not delete it, and she did not fully understand why, except that deleting it would require acknowledging that every version of herself she had believed in for the past 11 months had been a performance for an audience that had never been watching her at all. Marcus, in the furnished corporate apartment in Midtown Charlotte that felt like a hotel that had run out of warmth, opened a laptop on Saturday morning with no clear intention, and a chest that felt like it was being compressed by a weight he could not name. He typed her name into a search engine for the first time in 4 years of marriage. Elara Voss Whitfield. He typed it slowly with the specific horror of a man who was beginning to understand that the absence of information is itself a kind of information. Almost nothing came back. That was the design. A thumbnail photograph on a Virginia business registry filing, so small it could have been anyone. A single line in a Delaware trust instrument buried inside a corporate document that required a legal background to locate. She had been professionally and almost completely invisible, not because nobody was looking, or because someone had been extraordinarily deliberate about ensuring there was nothing to find. He searched Edward Whitfield. The Forbes profile loaded in the second result, 47 acquisitions across 3 decades. A congressional testimony on infrastructure investment, or a profile from 2020 that described Whitfield Global Holdings as the most strategically invisible major conglomerate in American corporate history. And near the bottom of the piece, a quote from an interview, something Edward had said offhand, or the way people say things that are too true to require decoration. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thinks matters. Marcus read that sentence 3 times. He thought about Elara at the leadership dinner, quiet at his elbow. Or he thought about Elara at the kitchen table with the restructuring memorandum she called something for a friend's portfolio. He thought about the Tuesday phone calls and the flat-tone ringtone and Daniel Cho, old friend from consulting. Or he thought about his last 4 promotions, each one arriving with a smoothness that had felt, at the time, like confirmation of his own exceptional quality. He called Victor Shaw at 9:45 a.m. Victor answered on the second ring. "Tell me the truth," Marcus said. "Right now, all of it." A pause that lasted long enough to be its own confession. "She reached out 8 months into your marriage," Victor said finally. "She asked me to watch over you. She wanted to know if you were genuinely good at the work, or if it was just confidence." A breath. "I told her you were good. I meant it." Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. "She approved my promotions. The board reviewed them. Her signature was required for anything above director level. Every one of your promotions for the last 3 years went through her office before it was finalized." Victor's voice carried something that was not quite guilt and not quite pity, but lived in the territory between them. "Marcus, she was trying to give you something real, a career that was actually yours." "She wanted," Marcus said. "She was giving you every advantage she could without telling you where it came from." "I think she hoped I said don't." He ended the call. He drove to Mooresville on Wednesday evening with no plan beyond the need to sit somewhere that still felt like it had a floor. Catherine's porch light was on when he pulled into the driveway. She opened the door before he reached the steps. She had been watching for his headlights, the way she had watched for them since he was 17, and had a curfew he never quite kept. They sat in the kitchen with coffee in front of him and the particular silence of 2 people who have arrived at the same place by different roads. Catherine held her mug in both hands and watched her son with the face of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and is finally ready to set it down, even knowing that setting it down will hurt both of them. "You knew," he said. Not a question. 2 years after the wedding, she said, "I hired someone. I needed to know who you'd married." He looked at his mother for a long time across the kitchen table where she had fed him before school, helped him with geometry homework, cried when he told her about business school. "And you said nothing." "What was I going to say to you, Marcus?" He opened his mouth. "If I had told you, imagine it. Really imagine it. You find out your wife controls the company you work for, that she's worth more than everything you will ever earn compounded across 4 lifetimes." She held his gaze. "How do you treat her after that?" He started to answer. "Think before you answer," she said quietly. "Because it matters." He closed his mouth. The answer was there in the space between them, visible to both of them. He would not have loved her more. He would not have been faithful. He might have been more careful. He would have performed gratitude and devoted attention, and the kind of strategic tenderness that men perform when they understand the stakes. And Elara, who had been watching him for 14 months, before she agreed to marry him, would have known the difference immediately. "I protected you," Catherine said. "I thought I was giving you a fair chance to be who I hoped you were." Her voice did not waver. Something in her eyes did. "I was wrong too. I protected you from accountability, and accountability was the only thing that might have saved you. Marcus put his face down on the kitchen table. The sound he made was not crying exactly. It was the sound of a man whose entire narrative of himself, competent, successful, desired, smart enough to build something real, had been dismantled piece by piece across 5 days, and there was nothing left underneath it worth showing anyone. Catherine put her hand on the back of her son's head, the way she had when he was small and sick, and the world was still a size he could navigate. She did not tell him it would be fine. She did not offer him the comfort of a lie. She kept her hand there in the kitchen, in the quiet, while outside the Mooresville night continued on entirely without concern for any of them. She thought about the orange tulips, about a woman who had known for months exactly what was coming and had still walked into that restaurant carrying the right flowers for the right person. She thought about what it costs to be that precise, what it costs to be that patient, what it costs to sit across from someone who underestimates you every single day and keep giving them chances they don't know they're receiving. That is not weakness, Catherine thought. That is the most controlled form of strength I have ever seen in my life. She kept her hand on her son's head and said nothing. Outside, the night was very quiet. 1 week to the hour after Catherine Holt's birthday dinner, a manila envelope arrived at Marcus's corporate apartment at 9 in the morning, delivered by a courier who asked only for a signature and offered nothing else. No return address. His full name in black ink on the front. Handwriting he recognized immediately, because he had seen it on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the margins of books Elara left around the house. Books he had never looked at closely enough to understand. The handwriting of someone for whom even penmanship was a considered act. Inside, the divorce petition, already moving through family court, its language clean and precise and devastating in the way that documents are devastating when they have been written by people who knew exactly what they were doing. No alimony claim, no bid for his personal savings, the car he owned outright, his individual accounts. She wanted nothing from him. She had never needed anything from him. That was the most brutal line in the entire document, and it was written between the lines, invisible everywhere, present in everything. Beneath the petition, a single index card, black pen, 6 words. The real game starts Monday. He read it 3 times. He set it on the kitchen counter and stepped back and read it again from a distance, as though distance would change what it said. It did not. His phone rang within the hour. Unknown number. He answered because there was no version of this week where an unknown call could make anything worse. A woman's voice, professional. Unhurried. Mr. Holt, my name is Margaret Cole. I represent Elara Voss Whitfield. I'm calling to inform you that beginning Monday morning, a full review will be initiated of all business relationships, client referrals, vendor endorsements, and professional introductions made during your tenure at Whitfield Global, in which Mrs. Whitfield's identity was directly or indirectly a contributing factor. Every counterparty will receive a formal letter Monday morning disclosing who Mrs. Whitfield is and inviting them to clarify the nature of their relationship with you going forward. Marcus's hand closed around the index card. Every board member who took your lunch, Margaret Cole continued, her voice carrying the same temperature as water in February. Every client who chose your division over a competitor, every vendor who expedited a contract, they are all going to understand by Monday afternoon exactly what the basis of your professional credibility actually was. She's going to tell all of them, Marcus said. Not a question. A man watching the last wall come down. Additionally, Margaret said, our review has identified a private consulting arrangement you maintained outside your Whitfield Global contract, which received payments routed through an entity with ties to a Whitfield subsidiary. We will be in touch regarding the legal implications of that arrangement. A pause of exactly the right length. Good morning, Mr. Holt. Have a nice weekend. The call ended. Marcus stood in the characterless apartment with the index card in his hand, and Margaret Cole's words reorganizing the architecture of everything he had believed himself to own, his reputation, his network, his professional history, the consulting side arrangement he had kept in a separate account like a private room nobody else had the key to, all of it connected to Elara, all of it visible to her, All of it apparently already documented and already moving toward a Monday morning that he now understood was not an ending, but the formal beginning. He read the index card one final time. The real game starts Monday. E. Outside, Charlotte moved through an ordinary Friday with no awareness of and no interest in his particular catastrophe. Edward Whitfield was out of the hospital. He was recovered, not fully, not yet, but walking, cane in hand, through the corridor of the Richmond estate where the floors carried the weight of 4 decades of decisions. He had read Daniel Cho's summary of the birthday dinner on Saturday morning with his coffee, reading the whole account twice, completely without rushing. When he finished, he set the pages on the table beside his cup. He looked out the window at the Virginia tree line for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. "Tell my driver I'm going to Charlotte next week," he said when the call was answered. "And find me a quiet coffee shop near where Marcus Holt is living. I want to talk to the boy." He hung up. He walked to the window and looked at the tree line and did not smile, and did not frown, and recorded the future the way he had always recorded it, as something that had already been decided and simply needed time to arrive. His daughter had not gotten angry. His daughter had gotten ready. She had done it the way he raised her, quietly, completely, without letting anyone see the preparation until the preparation was already complete. Alara was in Richmond, not at the Charlotte house. She had begun the process of instructing her property management team to list it. She was at the estate, sitting on the porch in the late afternoon light, watching the tree line the way she had watched it on the evening of her mother's funeral, when the sky was copper and her father had said the thing that would shape everything she became. She held her mother's pearl earrings in her palm, turning them over once, twice. Then she set them in the jewelry box on the small outdoor table beside her chair and looked at the trees. The board briefing was at 8 Monday morning. She had told Margaret Cole to set it up early. She wanted the room settled before business hours. There were restructuring decisions to finalize, leadership transitions to communicate, and 2 divisions whose acquisition pipelines needed to be reviewed by someone who understood what had actually been going inside them. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That had never been the problem. The porch door opened behind her. Edward, moving slowly with his cane, came to stand beside her. He lowered himself into the chair next to hers with the careful economy of a man, whose body was reminding him, these days, that it had opinions. He looked at the tree line for a while without speaking. "The board will be fine," he said finally. "They've been expecting this, I know," she said. Another silence. The Virginia light doing what it always did at this hour, going copper and unhurried, and not apologizing for being beautiful. "You were right about him," Edward said. "Not an accusation. Not even a judgment, really. Just the acknowledgement of something both of them had known for different lengths of time." "I know that too," Lara said. He looked at her then, and she looked back, and in his face was everything she recognized. The precision, the patience, the refusal to simplify, and underneath it, something softer. The particular expression of a father who has watched his daughter become what he hoped she would become, and finds that the achievement is more complicated and more moving than pride can quite contain. "She would have been proud of you," he said. Alara nodded. She had already known that, too. She had known it in the way you know something you carry very quietly, in the place where the most important things live, the place below language, below strategy, below even grief. Her mother had died when she was 19 years old, and she had spent 15 years since then trying to be the kind of woman her mother would have recognized. The kind who did not require rescue. The kind who knew the difference between patience and endurance. The kind who could walk into a room where every force was arranged against her and still bring the right flowers to the right person. She had done that. She was going to keep doing that. The tree line went darker as the light shifted. Edward reached over and set his hand briefly on his daughter's for a moment. Then he took it back and looked at the trees again, and they sat together in the quiet, and for the first time in a very long while, Alara Voss Whitfield felt exactly the right size. If you found yourself thinking about this story long after it ended, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know what you think Alara did next.